So welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Gutman. I am the Chief Medical Educator for CAP Year. And for those who are not familiar with our company, we are a platform for pre-PA and pre-med students to apply for paid clinical employment during their gap years. So if you go to www.capyear.co, we could not afford the M as the joke, so it's .co. You'll find our job board as well as other great resources for students looking for clinical experience and particularly looking for jobs during your gap year. So Ashley Hughes is going to moderate the session, but I do want to let you know that the Q&A, so the chat function is not going to work, but if you do have a question, you can put it into the Q&A. We'll be the only ones who see that, but once we answer them, everyone will be able to see the answer. So feel free to use the Q&A liberally, and we can answer any questions that come up during the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, and we'll get things started.
Thank you, Deb. So again, my name is Ashley Hughes. I am the Program Director for the Bryant University Physician Assistant Program located in Smithfield, Rhode Island. I do have 3 people here today who have extensive experience in PA admissions who would like to share some information with you. The style that we'll use today is going to be a Q&A format while I'll pose some questions to our panelists, and they'll each take a turn answering that question. Dr. Gutman will also monitor the Q&A board, and if there are any questions that apply to that topic at hand, she will let us know and we'll address that topic. So first to begin, I would like to introduce our panelist, Josh Merson. He is the PA Program Director at the MGH Institute. And Josh, do you mind just giving us a little overview of your PA program?
Great. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Happy to join this wonderful panel with everyone else here. So thank you for that introduction. So the MGH Institute of Health Professions, we're located in Boston, Mass, in the little neighborhood of Charlestown, right on the water. We are a 25-month program that focuses more on that flipped classroom technique on team-based learning within the didactic year. We're an affiliate within the Mass General Brigham system, and MGH Institute of Health Professions is the only degree granting affiliate or institution as part of Mass General Brigham.
Thank you. Next, we have April Stouter. She's a representative of Duke University. So April, can you tell us about your role at Duke and a bit about your program as well?
Sure, happy to, and thanks so much for having me tonight. My name is April Stouter. I'm the Associate Program Director at the Duke PA program, and in that role, I also serve as the Director of Admissions. I've been at Duke for a number of years in a variety of different roles and practice clinically at Duke as well. Our program is in Durham, North Carolina. North Carolina is a great state to be a PA and a great state to be a PA learner. Our program is really focused on our mission of training primary care PAs, and we also have an emphasis on underserved communities. That goes back to the roots of the profession and Dr. Stead founding the PA profession at our institution.
Thank you. Next, we have Melissa Chaffron. She's the PA Program Director at the University of Lynchburg.
Hi, good evening, everyone. At the University of Lynchburg, we are a 27-month program. We are located in Lynchburg, Virginia. We really focus on leadership, service, and advocacy for the PA profession. And we do that by doing annual swab trips to medically underserved areas. And we serve both globally in Oaxaca, Mexico, or Nicaragua, but also here locally. So that's some of the foundation of our PA program that we continue to nurture and grow.
Wonderful, thank you. So looking at all 3 programs, it looks like most of these programs are about 2 years, if not slightly over 2 years in length. Can you tell me a little bit more about the didactic and clinical phases of your program so that students who are interested know what to expect from your university? I think, Josh, you already touched on this a little bit when you mentioned team-based learning. So if you can just expand on that a bit more, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. I will say I have some thunderstorms coming into this area, so hopefully I don't lose internet coverage. So we'll deal with that if that happens to occur. So 25-month program, the first year is entirely didactic within, let's say, September start, and then you'll finish the following August with your didactic training. Within that, again, we use the flipped classroom technique. There's a lot of information on a website about that with what team-based learning is. I think it's a very fun format where most of the time in the classroom is spent doing application activities and working through problems, whereas that lecture component actually occurs at home. And then in the second year, there are 9 5-week rotations, 7 are core. In the usual rotations or clerkships, including family, internal, OB, psychiatry, etc. And then you're allowed 2 additional electives and a specialty of your choice from there.
Great description, thank you. So we'll move on to April.
So we have an August start in our didactic year, and that runs through the following June. And then the clinical year starts in July and runs through the following August. Our didactic year is focused on small group learning. We're not a TBL program or a PBL program per se, but we do focus throughout our curriculum. There is a thread of primary care training, as I mentioned before. And we also, because we are at an academic medical center, students have the opportunity to go in their didactic year and start seeing patients who are hospitalized or in our clinics, practicing history and physical exam skills with the mentorship of practicing PAs. We also use standardized patients for experiences throughout the first year so that students can really hit the ground running in their second year when they're going out with their preceptors. In our second year, our rotation blocks are 4 weeks in length, and there's 12 rotations. 10 of those are core rotations and 2 are electives. And with a program that's affiliated at an academic medical center, we have a large variety of specialty and subspecialties to choose from because everything is super subspecialized at an academic medical center. So lots of opportunities, and we also have global health electives as well.
Thank you. Melissa?
So very similar to April and Duke, we have a problem-based learning, a little bit of a focus, but it's not the entirety of our curriculum. We have some team-based learning approaches as well, but that's typically heading into the spring semester of your first didactic year. We enroll starting in May, and didactic year lasts for an entire year. Very similar to Duke, we have a community clinic where students every week in their didactic year will go down to our local free clinic and see patients so that they can take those experiences and expand upon them in the clinical year. In our didactic year, we also have a fully integrated ultrasound curriculum, as well as virtual reality that we use every week during our simulation lab. In the clinical year, that is a year of our program as well. There are 11 4-week rotations. 7 of those are cores, with 4 being electives of students choosing. The reason our program is a little bit longer and is 27 months is we have a 1-month-long summative phase at the end of clinical year. That 1 month allows us to review, go over everything prior to taking the boards and graduation to fully prepare you for taking your PANCE. And then you graduate in the middle of August.
Great. So each of these programs have some minor differences. What's key for students to know is when these programs do start, because that makes the difference on when they want to submit their application. And what's also helpful to know is if you have rolling admissions in your program also, because some of you start in the fall. And for example, my program starts in January. So very different timelines there.
So not to interrupt, Ashley, but do you want to give a little intro to the Bryant program?
That would be great.
Off the list, yes.
For the sake of time, I was omitting myself, but
Okay.
yes, yeah, I would love to. So Bryant is a program that's a little bit over 2 years. So we're looking at 27 months here. We have a 15-month didactic phase. So we have had historically a 12-month didactic phase, but coming up for this next cohort, we are expanding it to 15 months. And from there, there's a 12-month clinical phase. And there are 8 oh my gosh, my clinical coordinator would kill me if I said 8 electives. So there are 8 core rotations and there are 2 electives. And for the type of education that we deliver, we have a combination of problem-based learning, your typical didactic lectures, and also medical simulation, patient care encounters where we bring in standardized patients. And we have 2 free clinics that we do send our students to beginning about 1 month or so into the program.
Okay, now you can go back to your questions.
Okay.
Just wanted to make sure Bryant got its moment.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, does your program use a rolling admissions process? And anybody can answer here. Okay,
Yes,
so it seems
we
like
do.
everyone does.
I do not. Yeah.
Oh, great. I was hoping there'd be one that was different. So can you tell me about your process for admitting students into the program?
Yeah, so it's quite a long process, which is interesting. So this current CASPA cycle, so in 2023, this is for application in the following calendar year of September of 2024. We're trying to streamline it a little bit and find out the optimal time period, but right now our final CASPA application deadline is October 1st, with interviews to occur between the fall and very early winter in January, with that plan for the September start date in 2024. We do have the firm deadline. We don't make any decisions on interviews until that deadline.
I'm guessing this is different from April and Melissa. Is that true? Okay. April, can you tell me about your admissions?
Sure. We open CASPA in April and read applications all summer long. And we do 4 different weeks of interviews starting mid-September and finishing up right before Thanksgiving. We do cap the number of acceptances in each of those interview weeks so that we definitely still have spots available if you interview in week 4. And then once week 4 is done, we fill up all the remaining spots based on sort of a ranked order. So we do have that rolling admissions, and then similar to Josh, we're doing all of that in anticipation of a start the following August.
Is this different than what you do in your program, Melissa?
Nope, exactly the same. We open in mid-April. We start immediately reviewing applications. We also have 4 interviews. We cap each and then review any remaining open seats and select from our active list.
And I think that's interesting to know, because although we always encourage everyone to apply early, because of rolling admissions, it's good to know that each interview cycle, there is still opportunity to get in, because we also tell people submit it when it's ready and it's done well. So, you know, do it early, but don't do it sloppy, I guess is the answer. You still have a chance, even if it's a day or 2 later.
Right. And I will say that not every program operates in one of those 2 ways. Bryant is sort of in the middle of both of those. So we do have our cycle start in April. That's when CASPA opens. We start reviewing applications just like April all through the entire summer. It seems like we're doing it every single week. And we send out invitations for interview beginning in May. And we have about 8 different interview sessions that occur. And the last one is in the very first week of November. And then we start in January. We don't have a specific cap for each of those interview sessions. So we do advise students to apply early, because there could only be a handful of spots towards those last interview sessions. So my next question for you is about prerequisites. Do you have any guidelines to give to students listening right now about prerequisites? And that would be in terms of when they should have those completed by, and if they can have any outstanding prerequisites before they enroll into your program.
You can start with Josh.
Yeah, I was gonna say we can start doing the same thing we did before. We'll start with Josh.
Sounds good. So for us, there is no outstanding prerequisites that are allowed. All prerequisites need to be completed at the time of application. So whenever you hit that submit button on CASPA, that's exactly when all your prerequisites need to be completed and have that appropriate grade. And for us, our minimum is yes for all of our prerequisites.
That cut out a tiny bit. So what was the minimum?
B- is the minimum
Okay.
prerequisite
I
grade
think we're
for
in the
us.
same storm, but yes.
I think there's 3 of us in the same storm right now.
Yes,
A long line across all of New England right now.
yeah.
So for our prerequisites, you can have 2 outstanding prereqs at the time of application, and those need to be done by December before matriculation. So if you go through the process and interview and get accepted, there is sort of a contingency that you complete those prereqs and send us the transcript by December. And then for our prereqs, we do accept pass fail for prereqs. In the era of COVID, we had to move in that direction, but we actually did pre-COVID too. And our minimum acceptable grade is a C.
Thank you. Melissa?
We also allow 2 outstanding prerequisites in anticipation that if you interview and are accepted to our program, that those are completed prior to matriculation. We do not allow pass-fail courses to be considered towards your prerequisites. All prerequisites have to have a minimum of a C when they're completed, but your overall GPA for those prerequisites needs to be a 3.0.
Thank you.
Oh,
So just like the last question, I think my program here is falling somewhere in the middle of all of yours. So we allow for 1 prerequisite, but that prereq has to be completed by October. There has to be a grade of C or better. And with all of the prerequisites, that GPA has to be 3.0 or better.
So Ashley, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A that I think are good questions. And I know you were going to get to a question about clinical experience, and those are ones that are hitting the Q&A. So why don't we kind of skip ahead to that so we can sort of address those. So the first question in the Q&A is, in terms of patient care hours, what do you typically look for during undergraduate years to acquire such hours? Are there preferences for certain positions like EMT versus medical assistant? This is a multiple stage question. And do you count hours worked in wilderness medicine, such as like a wilderness first responder, towards these hours? So the general question is, how do you handle patient care hours in the application cycle?
Great. So I can start here and then we can move down the line. So for us, we actually do require a fair number of clinical hours before someone applies to the program. So our applicants should have 2,000 patient care hours before they apply. So they have to have those done through and logged through CASPA. So that's roughly about 2 years full-time experience. We do look at the job description that students fill in. So I don't want to say that one job counts for more than another. All I would recommend is that the student really lists every single task that they do so that we get a good understanding of their patient care experience.
Josh?
I will 100% agree with that. We have a minimum of 1,000 hours. Our average tends to range year by year, as does most programs. I really agree, really listing all the tasks and every single duty that you have. Some jobs are not as common. Some tech jobs aren't as clear as whether or not you have detailed patient care experience or you're doing something that may just be patient transport, which likely would not count. So we want to see all the wonderful things that you're doing in any healthcare role. And my general advice for every aspect of the application is always list everything that you're doing. List your clinical experience, your volunteer hours. Let us be the ones to judge whether or not that counts or not. But if you don't put it on your application with clinical experience included, we don't have the ability to see all the amazing things that you're doing. So general advice for including all the details across the board for what you actually have accomplished.
So what I'm hearing a little bit is, and what I understand to be true, is that it is about the patient-facing contact, right? And actually being involved directly in patient care. And we were talking a little bit before we went live about how hospitals sometimes they will slot you in a job title, even though you have other responsibilities. And so they kind of slot you into the job title that works to hire you, but that doesn't always explicitly tell someone what you were actually doing. And so, I think what they're both emphasizing is make sure if there was patient facing, so it isn't the title, it's the were you caring for patients. And if you feel like the title doesn't really clarify that as long as you do that in your description, it'll be clear to the program that you were caring for patients. Does that sound right? I can hear
Yes.
April and Melissa can give me their 2 cents, but
Yes, no, that's a great summary.
someone asked about volunteer hours, though. That was the other follow-up question, was do hospital volunteer hours count towards patient care hours? So I guess the bigger question is, if it's not paid experience, will that count towards their patient care hours?
So I'll start here with April. So April, do you mind addressing this question in regards to your program?
Sure, and I'll start with the super vague, it depends. If you are volunteering in a hospital and it's mostly sort of greeting patients or stocking shelves, that really isn't something that would count towards patient care hours. However, there's certainly a number of volunteer positions, such as volunteer EMTs, maybe in rural areas, and those absolutely would count. So again, as Josh mentioned, a description of it, of what your responsibilities are, will help us parse that out. And we also recognize that there are some roles that maybe you are doing some patient care activities and some more clerical duties or something like that. And so if we run across that and we have a good description, then we might be able to give partial credit or 50% credit for patient care for the hands-on aspect of the job. And then the non-patient care sort of goes into a different category and it doesn't count towards the hours. So sometimes we're able to give people credit when they list it as non-patient care, but they'll get 50% credit because of what they described in their role. So even volunteer work for our program will count it if it is hands-on patient care.
Is there anything that you have to add to that, Melissa?
Nope, same exact way we view things as April.
So even if they miscategorize, you can sort of read the description and recategorize and give them credits. Okay. And
Yes.
then sort of last follow-up just from the Q&A, sorry, Ashley, but they just, similar to prerequisites, they're asking if all PCE hours have to be completed by the date of application, or can they be updated as the application cycle goes on?
Right. So for my program specifically, we do accept updates to those patient care hours. So if you are very close to the mark and you want to submit your application early on because of the rolling admissions process, you certainly can, and make a notation of the expected number of hours that you will have completed if you remain in your role before you would matriculate into the program, so that we can read your application and understand, oh, okay, you might have a few hundred more hours to add here. So we know you'll hit our minimum before you start the program.
There's a lot of questions about clinical care, Ash, so I'm sorry to have diverted
That's
this whole
okay.
conversation, but someone's asking, which I probably could answer in the Q&A, but how do we know if we meet the minimum number of hours before we apply if we don't know if it's going to count? But I do feel we've sort of answered that. I mean, you have to use your best judgment. I heard someone say this once, and I don't think it's the best way to think about it, but to really figure out if you're doing direct patient care, the question is, if you've made a mistake, would it directly affect the patient? Again, that's not my greatest way to think about it, but it does work a little bit. If you're stocking shelves and you make a mistake, not really going to have a whole lot of impact on that patient's trajectory. So it's kind of a negative way to think about it, but I think it does kind of answer the question a little bit.
I would agree. So we pretty much tell students to think about how much face-to-face contact are you having with patients. If you're having that face-to-face contact, that is likely going to count.
I would also just recommend, because it's so expensive to apply to schools, you want to make sure that you actually meet that program's prerequisites. So when in doubt, before you plunk money down and send your application, contact the program and verify or check their website, because a lot of programs have examples of what patient care hours count or don't count based on the questions that they tend to get frequently. And they'll also be really clear of when their deadline is for the patient care, whether that's at the time of application or if there's sort of an ability to add some more hours. So website, and don't be afraid to ask.
And that also really feeds into the next question. And my question for you all is, who can applicants contact if they have questions specifically about their transcripts? And that may come up if an applicant has taken a course that might not have the same exact course title or description as is listed on your PA program's website. Is there an admissions person they can reach out to? Or is this something where they should just put this in their application and maybe somebody will contact them if their courses don't meet the prerequisites?
I can start again.
Yes.
We have a specific email on our website, pa@mghihp.edu, or you can also use our admissions team. There's a specific form on our website as well if you want to actually double check course equivalency and verify if any of this information is correct. So you'll find it on our admissions page on the mghihp.edu website, which will be able to provide more information. And I promise you, we are responsive to that form stack and those emails. So someone will get back to you with that information.
Thank you. April or Melissa?
Same. You can reach out to our admissions team on our website. There's a link to paadmission.mc.duke.edu. And if you have any question about whether a course would count before you apply and spend your money, just reach out. And we look at course descriptions all the time. And sometimes a student will think this isn't going to count, but I'll send it anyway. And we do count it. So it's worth an ask.
I would agree. Absolutely.
So I'm gonna butt in with the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say for Lynchburg, it's pa@lynchburg.edu. And same, we highly encourage applicants before they apply or during that application process, if they have questions, to reach out to us.
Thank you.
So while we're talking about applicant questions, there's a very specific one, but sort of the general question is, what are the general prerequisites? But I think that can typically be found on most schools' websites. So I would encourage you to look there. But the other one is about GPAs. And so I do think that's a good question for the group, whether there's sort of a minimum GPA or something you're looking for when you look at that transcript. And then the question in the chat is, would a high number of clinical hours help offset a lower GPA of 3.5?
Right. So I think that's a really great question, and it does tie into another question that I have here. So the question I'd like to pose is, how much weight is placed on things like volunteerism, leadership roles, and community involvement when you review applications? Because we hear all the time about GPAs, students have to have high GPAs, their BCP GPA has to be high as well, but there are other factors that are taken into consideration. Can you please address those items that you look at and how much weight is placed on those items? All right, we're going to go backwards this time. I'm going to start with Melissa.
I love it. So for us, there is an emphasis on GPA, but that's not the only thing that we look at. We have very much a holistic approach to it. We look at volunteer hours and GPAs and GREs, but also what type of direct care experience have you had? Are you a first generation college student? Are you a minority applicant? Are you from an HRSA, like underrepresented group? So things like that. We look at really the whole application, as opposed to you have a 3.3 GPA, which means that there's no way you'd ever get in. That's definitely not true for our program. We admit students all the time whose cumulative or science GPA is a 3.3. Our about median GPA average is about a 3.5 or a 3.6, but again, that's the average, which means that there's some that's higher and some that are lower. So don't focus so heavily on GPA all the time, or your GRE. You really are submitting yourself as an entire person, because that's what you're going to be when you're a PA. So that's kind of what we look at.
April?
I agree with that. We also have a holistic approach, and we don't have a specific GPA or GRE cutoff. There are programs that do. So again, it behooves an applicant to really do their homework and check the program's website to see if they would be eligible to move forward, because you don't want to spend time and money on an application to a program where you don't meet their requirements from the get-go. So do a little investigating, do a little homework. And then, oh my gosh, Ashley, my mind just went blank. What was the second part of that question?
And how much weight do you place on volunteerism, leadership,
Oh, thank you.
maybe
Yes.
participation in athletics?
Yes. So that is something that we look at. We are a mission-driven program, and service and leadership, primary care, intention to work with underserved populations or experience doing that are all elements that we look at. We also give some additional preference to people from North Carolina. North Carolinians only make up about 20 to 25% of our cohort. So we're not all North Carolina. And then also for veterans as well. And those things are clearly articulated on our website in terms of sort of mission alignment. And so I guess that's the other piece, is when you're looking at PA program websites, look to see if their mission sort of aligns with your own personal values or your own personal mission.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Josh?
I will add in, I agree with everything that was said. Very, very similar. We do have a minimum of 3.0 for overall GPA. But I can't stress enough that mission alignments, because part of our mission is generating compassionate, empathetic students. So guess what? Showing evidence of compassion, empathy, and real life examples in your essay or other aspects of your application, that actually counts as part of your overall application score. We look at leadership, we look at volunteerism. I would say for us, ongoing sustained volunteerism holds a lot of weight than just doing a one-time, let's say, volunteer event that only took 2 hours. So showing consistency is really, really important. And then we do give essentially extra credit in a way, right, for veterans, very much like why our PA profession was founded. In addition to that, those that are actually employees of the Mass General Brigham system also have an additional look and preference slight that's included in the application.
Thank you. So I would say that the admissions process at Bryant is fairly similar. So we have a GPA requirement of 3.0 for the overall GPA at a minimum. I would say that that's not a hard and fast rule, because as other program directors have mentioned, sometimes you'll find students a little below, some a little higher. We also look at the BCP, and we have preference for a BCP GPA over 3.0. And we look at all other aspects of the application. We really do give credit for things like volunteer activities, participation in community events, teaching, research, publication, all of that feeds in. So we also have a holistic approach.
So two things. BCP, for those who are listening and don't know what that is the breakout of your GPA of biology, chemistry, and physics, or science GPA. And then I have a sort of a kind of a follow-up question, although, you know, you've all sort of touched on it, but getting involved in the community, someone's asking what type of volunteer work is sort of relevant to an application. So I don't know if anyone had any thoughts on, you know, either making suggestions of things you've seen people do, or, you know, sort of clarifying what type of volunteer work people are.
I would say just about anything is relevant, and to put it in your application. We've had applicants put in volunteer work that they've done through Big Brothers Big Sisters. They have put in time spent at food pantries, time spent at free clinics. So it all counts. It all falls under that umbrella of volunteerism and community involvement.
Anyone else have something they want to add to that?
Yes.
Josh.
That's the answer. Essentially, any volunteerism is looked upon favorably. Whatever your interest is, working at an animal shelter holds just as much weight as doing hospital work, patient-facing work. Working for any of your favorite charities, absolutely, it all looks really, really good. We just want to see volunteerism, and that's the most important part.
Yes.
So I would say, as a pre-health advisor, my answer runs the gamut of what you're trying to show on your application, right, is character and competencies, right? So showing your readiness to be a healthcare professional. So any work where you can demonstrate those competencies and character and values, it doesn't really matter what the work is, but if you're demonstrating compassion and empathy and a sense of service and justice, or all of those good things, then it's viable volunteer work.
And Deb, in previous conversations, when we've talked about admissions, we've discussed that students should look at a program where their values align with the mission and where they fit the student profile of the average admitted student. Can each of you speak to your average admitted student profile? And that could include GPA, clinical hours, background. So we can start with April.
Sure. For our student profile, I think our average age student hovers around, it always was around 26 years old. I want to say it's probably closer to 25 now, as the applicant pool is trending a little bit younger. The PA profession's out there and people know sooner what they want to do. We post on our website statistics for the incoming class. So we're going to be updating soon for the class starting in August, of the middle 50% of the class. So if we take the whole class and break them up into 4 quartiles in terms of their GPA and their GRE and their patient care experience, then that middle 2 groups, the 50%, is what we post. And that means that 25% of the class is below that and 25% of the class is above that. And that is a really good barometer of sort of where you would fall in a typical cohort at our program. And so you can look at each of those academic metrics and sort of measure yourself against that to kind of see, all right, do I fall in this typical range, keeping in mind that a quarter of the class is above and a quarter of the class is below.
Perfect. Thank you. Melissa?
Very similar. We post ours as well. Our average age is around 24. Average GPA 3.6. We have about 60% female, 40% male. I would say not quite half of our class are from Virginia, and then the other remaining is from kind of the surrounding states. And then we sometimes get some from kind of the East Coast or the West Coast that want to venture over to the East Coast with us. But we typically, our direct patient care hours, our minimum is 500. But what's really important is I feel our number is a little bit kind of on the lower side when you look at other PA programs. But if you look at the average admitted student, their direct healthcare experience is over 2,000 hours. So kind of same thing, can see all that information and breakdown to see where you'd fall right on our website.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Josh?
I don't have much else to add. This seems to be the general applicant pool. Our average age was around 26, 27. That has dropped to around 25. Average healthcare hours. Every so often we have 1 year where that hours go way up to 5,000 hours, but that's always because we admitted someone that has 20 years of clinical experience, has been in the military for years on end, and that can actually bump up those hours. So in general, it tends to hover around 2,700 hours per applicant. And again, that's just that's the median or mean range. So that does vary across the gamut. I think that's really all I can really add to that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I would say that at Bryant, it's very similar to what you all described. So our average student profile looks like it's comprised mostly of women. We have an average age of 26.5 years old. They have about nearly 3,000 hours clinical experience, and they all have some sort of volunteer and leadership experience in their background. And I would say most of them have a degree in biology or a degree in kinesiology, exercise science, or chemistry. I would say those are probably our most common undergrad degrees.
So Ashley, a few questions have come up in the Q&A that I was hoping we could address live, that are really more sort of about the admissions process and how you actually review applicants. So one of the questions is, what does holistic review look like at your program? So I guess a better description of what that would look like from each program. And the other ones that sort of go hand in hand. One was, how do you stand out in a personal statement, which is sort of along the same lines. And then how would you stand out in an interview?
Yes. So I think each person has already touched a bit on the holistic application approach, but maybe we'll revisit that and talk about if you use a particular rubric for your admission. So as you're going through CASPA applications, what does that include and how much how that is broken down. I think that might be helpful for students. So we will start with Melissa again.
We typically initially will review all of our applications and make sure that each meet our minimum prerequisites. From there, after we see that they've met our minimum prerequisites, we don't use an official rubric other than really just kind of looking at GPAs, looking at GREs, but there's no minimum GRE that you have to get. And seeing kind of where students are with those those numbers, and then we look at their volunteer, their direct patient care hours, their background, their experience, and that is kind of all the information we use to lead us in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. April and Josh, do you have anything additional to add?
Our process is similar. We sort of have a score calculation that happens once we verify that someone has met all the prerequisites. And that's based on some of those academic metrics and patient care hours. And then once that score is computed, if it meets a certain threshold, then it'll go on to be read. And then more weight is placed on the reader scores than on those initial academic metrics. So we don't have any cutoffs, like I said. So there was a question earlier, you know, if you have a lot of patient care hours, could that potentially offset maybe a lower GRE or GPA? Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that we use a very similar process to what you use at Duke.
Very similar process for us. I think most of us are all on CASPA. We have staff or other admissions personnel that are doing that initial review, being sure they meet all the minimum prerequisites. And then from there, they're being passed on to faculty to provide the more detailed scoring system. Weight in most places tends to be a little bit heavier on healthcare experience hours and GPA. But then all the other elements, as we talked about before with volunteerism, leadership, we don't require GRE, but if you require GRE, that's part of that. And the other elements of the required elements of the application all have varying weight. But most of us, I would say, focus pretty heavily, or at least a little bit more weight on GPA and healthcare experience than letters of recommendation, essay, passion for the PA profession, so on and so forth.
And how can somebody stand out for you when you read applications? So we all come across plenty of applications with students with similar backgrounds, similar GPAs. What makes a person stand out? Is it their personal statement? Is it their diversity of life experience? What is it for you in your program that makes you look at that person and say, yes, they are a good fit for our program?
It's a very difficult question because it's everything, right? As we talked about before, with varying weights, you could have a little bit lower GPA, a little bit lower healthcare experience hours. Could be right around 2,000, right around like below what the average is. But your letters of recommendation are amazing volunteer experience. You spent a lot of time in leadership. Maybe you were the CEO of a nonprofit organization, and that can actually bump you up when you don't have as strong in these other areas. And I think most of us have the same process across the board when we're talking about weighting. And how the weights work is that if you're weaker in one area, placing it on the CASPA application really allows you to stand out in other areas. So if you have done it at any point since you were 18 years old, since high school, you should probably list it on your application. And then when it comes specifically to the essay, this is another area of mission alignments that if you have your top 3 schools and they all have very similar mission statements, talk about how you might fit into that style of mission and what makes you and you wanting to be a PA. So focus on those schools, and I think can be supportive to allow you to score higher for those schools that have the mission statement that aligns with your own values. And this goes without being said, but be sure that spelling and grammar are actually accurate, as many times that's what would make you not stand out. We read plenty of essays that have spelling errors or many significant grammatical mistakes. and that you would actually be marked off much lower on the essay, and have that probably a lower score overall, when you should be able to achieve that highest ranking for each essay that you submit.
Mhm. April?
I agree that it's sort of a combination of life experience, great work experience, patient care experience. But the essay or the personal statements are where you get to kind of tell the admissions committee who you are, why you might be a good fit for our program or alignment with that mission. But also it's a space for you to really demonstrate that you understand the PA profession and you've sort of done your homework on the profession. I always wonder when I'm reading an application and they've never shadowed a PA, they've never worked with the PA, there's no indication that they have any exposure whatsoever to the PA profession. How do you know you want to be a PA? So demonstrate that in your application. And the other thing is, the personal statement really isn't a place to just sort of re-spit out your resume or, your achievements. It's a place for you to say your passion for patient care, your passion for the profession. Why do you feel like this is the place that you want to be and what you want to pursue? So don't just have it be sort of like your personal rah-rah session about all of your achievements, but really demonstrate to the committee that you have done your homework and that you're ready for this and it's for all the right reasons.
I couldn't agree anymore. With the volume of applications that we all read, those personal statements that really show us this person is committed to being a PA and fits with our university mission statements are the ones that stand out the most. Melissa, do you have anything to add?
Nope, agree with everything everyone said.
I have to let Melissa go first again.
I am, yes. So you're first for our next question. So the next question I have for you is, do you have any specific articulation agreements outside of what we've already addressed today? I know that we discussed having a preference for a certain population of people, but are there any undergrad universities that you have an articulation agreement with your PA program, Melissa?
So we have a graduate pathway at our undergraduate University of Lynchburg. And what that means is, as a freshman, when you're coming to the University of Lynchburg, you apply to be in the graduate pathway. If you're accepted and you continue to meet kind of the benchmarks that are set along that pathway, then you are guaranteed an interview at our program. That is not a guaranteed seat, however, and we only allow 10 of the graduate pathway students a year. So at most, we would have 10 students in an interview day as part of the graduate pathway. But again, not guaranteed a spot in our PA program.
April?
We don't have any articulation agreements or special pathways from other institutions or programs.
And Josh?
We have a bit of one. So at MGH Institute, we have a number of online prerequisites, and we actually have a pre-PA path if you did want to retake a lot of your prerequisite courses. And when you enroll in that, there's a little bit of a streamlined pathway that we can, if you meet the minimum criteria, which is a little bit higher than our normal minimums, we guarantee you an interview, not acceptance, but allow you a streamlined pathway to get interviewed by program faculty. And we're developing other connections locally, but that is in process, and that will be published in a press release in the next few weeks and months.
We'll be on the lookout for it. So at Bryant, we don't currently have any articulation agreements, but we're hoping within the next year or two that we will have a pathway for our undergraduate students who have higher GPAs, who fulfilled all of our minimum prerequisites to be able to have a guaranteed interview, but that's going to be very limited. It would be limited to 2 seats, and it's not guaranteed admission.
So Ashley, I have a question. It's a little bit of a detour from the comments, but there was 2 questions about research, so I figured we could address them live. One is whether lab research hours are actually relevant to a PA school application. As you know, for med school, there's a sort of a potentially heavier emphasis on research hours, and so people are wondering, is that important for applying to PA school? And the second part of that is whether clinical research hours, so the first one was about lab research, the second one was whether clinical research hours would count as direct patient care experience if they are working with patients directly.
So I would say that, as we've mentioned before, anything that you do, please put in your application. We also, although we don't give any specific credit to research when we review, that actually makes an applicant stand out because they've spent time doing that research and maybe they did a publication. So it's helpful, but it's not a requirement. And as far as clinical research experience, at Bryant, we do count that as patient care hours, as long as you can write in your description of what you've done that you've had those patient-facing contact hours. So list out all of your tasks. And ideally, if that describes, taking vital signs, taking a history, interacting with the patient, that fulfills the patient care hours necessary for the application. Melissa, do you have anything that's different that you use in your program?
No, same.
April and Josh?
Same. I would say that clinical research positions, that description's crucial, and that's maybe a role where somebody might get partial credit if they did phlebotomy. But if somebody, their main role was sort of updating databases or sort of the more administrative paperwork aspect of it, that is not something that we would count. So we always encourage people for clinical research to really be detailed in their job duties so we can give credit where credit's due.
I would assume, so I'm going to ask and not assume that consenting patients, which is often one of the roles, would be considered more of an administrative task than direct patient care.
Right. At least at my program it would, and based on April's description, it sounds like she would designate that the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question I have, which is a little bit less fun, is what is the annual tuition cost for your program? And that is something that students often want to know because this can help make their decision on what programs they do choose to apply to. So we'll start with April.
And as a follow-up in the Q&A, there is do you provide financial assistance? So that would be the follow-up question to what is your tuition?
April?
Super important. And we definitely know that finances are a big part of people's decisions about where to apply or where to accept their seat. Our tuition right now is $48,000-ish and a few change. If you add all the fees, it's about 55. And then if you add cost of living and all of the expenses, everything it takes to move to an area and live there for a year and attend school, it's about 85,000. And we do have scholarships available, some of which are offered with your offer of admission, and those are for our strongest mission alignment candidates.
So they are merit-based, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Melissa?
Our annual tuition currently is around $42,000. If you include the fees associated with the first year, the annual tuition for the first year is around $46,000 or $47,000.
And do you offer scholarships?
We do not have any scholarships associated with our PA program. We recommend students to contact the university and the admissions and see if there's anything that they may be able to assist them with, but we do not have any.
And Josh?
I'm trying to do the math on our website right now, just because most of our totals and with the 25-month program, it tends to be a little bit weird. But it's around the $57,000 per year, and that's inclusive of everything. We do offer a number of scholarships, including one full ride, as well as probably a good $600,000-$700,000 worth of additional scholarships to students that are very similar to mission alignment with our program. And then we also have a clinical year scholarship that's named after one of our students that unfortunately passed away last year due to lung cancer, one of our former students and alumni. So we have some clinical year scholarships as well. That's a different and separate application process.
So that full tuition scholarship, that's merit-based and mission alignment? Or is that something?
Yeah, it's a little bit weird because when it's with the offer of admission, so we don't have FAFSA at that point. So it tends to be more mission alignment, as well as what's listed on your CASPA application for essentially notes of need, or what may be need-based.
So at Bryant, our tuition is about $48,000. That is tuition and fees. And again, because it's a 27-month program, that total tuition is about $110,000 for the duration of the education. We do offer scholarships. This is actually the first year that we started offering scholarships to students, and it's based on mission match and financial need. And that is something that we're hoping to continue with. So Deb, I'm looking at the Q&A and I'm not seeing anything more
So
here.
we covered almost everything in the Q&A. So I like your last question, which is—
That's exactly where I was going. I'm glad we think so much alike.
Yes.
So
That's what happens when you work together for many years.
Yes. So my last question for all of our panelists today is, what advice would you give to a student interested in applying to your program? And we'll start with Melissa.
Would say applying early is great whenever the cycle opens, but if you do not have a complete application to submit in April, then it's okay to wait a few months to get those last remaining bits in, and then go ahead and submit it, since we are a rolling admissions process. And for us, it's, you know, when we see an applicant who may not have been interviewed or was interviewed but previously declined a seat in our program, and they reapply, we look at that and we see what they've done over the past year to improve their application. So if you are someone who does not get in on your first cycle, that does not mean give up. Just make sure that you're reapplying and that you're improving, and you're looking at what you can do during that gap year to make yourself even more kind of stand out for the next application cycle.
April?
I will just say, can we normalize rejection from PA school? Only about a third of applicants get accepted any cycle. So gap years are great. And like Melissa said, we want to see evidence that you have done something productive to improve your application if you were rejected the cycle before. I always say, submit an application when you're able to submit your best possible application. And so that might mean waiting a few months, or it might mean taking a gap year to retake a course, take some additional prereqs, retake a GRE, get more patient care hours, volunteer, shadow a PA, get some exposure, retool your essays. All of those things are things we love to see. So don't be afraid of a gap year if it's going to allow you to really have a phenomenal application next cycle.
Josh?
I will very much echo a lot of what was being said, though a little bit different. Instead of applying early for us, again, similar to April, let's wait until you have your best application. Take a look at the numbers. A little secret is everything that we do with CASPA is scored, right? It's the only way to actually organize 2,000, 3,000 applications that many of us may receive. So if you're looking at your application and if you're looking at healthcare hours, and you have, okay, I have 1,980 hours, I'm going to submit right now. Well, you're really, really close to what is likely an indicator, or at least to get you more points on the application by waiting to 2,000. That's not the case everywhere, but just some overall advice that those big numbers and 1,000 level groupings, or 3.0 to 3.25 to 3.5, 3.75, 4, tend to be some of these score differentiators for people. So if you're waiting on a prereq, wait to actually apply until you complete that prereq to actually bump you up over that last level. Aside from that, really show your best self. Again, like I said before, don't make the decision that something isn't healthcare related if it's volunteer or something else, because you think we may not like it or really appreciate or have a factor into our scoring, but it might. It's all tabbed. Let us know who you are as a person and show your best self. and why you're passionate about this profession. And I promise you'll end up standing out.
I couldn't agree more with all of the advice you all gave. That's exactly what I would say. For Bryant specifically, I would say applying early is key because of our rolling admissions process and it being slightly different from the process that both April and Melissa used. And I would say that any shadowing that you do, please put that in your CASPA application because it's helpful for us to know that you really truly understand the role of a PA in healthcare and you want to do this and you're committed to this profession. And I tell this to everybody, if you did not get in the previous year and you were put on the wait list, that is a great place to be. Being on the wait list is fantastic because now that tells you you were a great applicant. There's just maybe a couple things you need to tweak here and there. So look at your previous application, see where you can improve upon it a little bit, and then apply again. So re-applicants are very strong applicants in our program.
So we are at time. I do want to thank all of our panelists. That was really helpful, super informative. I do want to re-emphasize for all of the participants or people who are watching that if you need advice, one, all of the programs have sort of opened their doors. You can go to their websites, right? If you have a specific question about a specific program in your candidacy, you should not be afraid to reach out, but first check the website if the answer is there. But if you can't find the answer, or it's a very personal or specific question, you should reach out. And then don't be afraid to resource pre-health advisors. So, if you have one at your school, or we certainly have advising at CAPIer, and you can reach out to us as well. But, if you're not sure, ask questions, make sure, if there's one message that came through is make sure you are ready before you apply. It's a stressful, long, expensive, competitive process. So you should be putting your best foot forward. So thank you again. Thank you, Ashley, for moderating. Thank you, panelists, for joining. And someone asked if we will be sending out a recording of this. It will be posted on our YouTube channel for those who want to reference it later.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for joining. Have a great night.
Good night.